Okay, my name's Dal Wiscombe. I'm just going to look at one of the videos that came out, the top 10 facts the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know. So, just a quick correction on that. Mormon is a nickname that's been along with the church for a long time, but it's not the actual name of the church. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so, I mean, a lot of people just kind of assume that they know who we are, but we're going to look at um, what Simon Whistler here says. And I like Simon and a lot of his other work that he's done on some things, but sometimes if you don't have full context with things, you have to just kind of take a second look at it. So we'll see what he has here, and then we'll make some commentary on these 10 things here.
An article posted in the New York Times a few years ago sent shockwaves throughout the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormon Church. Hans Mattsson, a Swedish area authority equivalent to a cardinal overseeing the church's works in Europe, provided an interview expressing doubts about the church after learning of historical facts online that are never taught in Sunday school classes. Among the facts he found out were Joseph Smith's polygamous ways and some historical inconsistencies with the church's scriptures, such as the Book of Mormon. That a high-ranking official had not been aware of these facts throughout his church membership reveals the great lengths to which the Mormon Church had gone to in hiding the many truths that paint the church in a bad light. And with that in the video today, we're looking at 10 facts that the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know. Number 10. Joseph Smith married girls as young as 14. While the practice of polygamy in the church's early days is fairly common knowledge today, Mormon leaders and average members normally justify that by saying that it was once done to protect the widows at a time when male Mormon members were dying due to persecution. Yet a quick search of Joseph Smith's genealogy at church-owned FamilySearch.org would prove that he was married to teenage girls. Documents further show that the youngest girl that Joseph Smith married was Helen Mar Kimball, who was 14 years old at the time of marriage. One would have to really stretch the truth to believe that these teenage girls were widows that needed to be taken care of. Number 9.
So, polygamy, I mean, if you just take that at face value and look at just that little segment, first of all, when he mentioned the other man from Australia, I believe it was, the polygamy, I mean, if you look in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all polygamists. And if you're like a Bible believing person, you'd be like, ooh, well, then, even the Bible had polygamy in it. The thing about Joseph Smith and his time frame, to be honest with you, he really didn't want to practice polygamy. And I don't know that any, whether Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, whether they wanted to or not either, but the Lord, whatever the Lord commands is correct, whatever that may be. And that's based off of the Lord. So first of all, you're gonna have to, really be sure that you're getting information from God, as opposed to, oh, that's not happening anymore. God doesn't want this to happen, or God doesn't want that to happen. Oh no, he doesn't want this to be done or that to be done. So you're actually really going to have to assess what really God is telling you. People get confused about that, but whatever God commands is right, no matter what it is. And it's, you have to have that right spirit in order to know that. But yes, Joseph Smith had a lot of wives. The church isn't trying to hide any of that. They're going to be very transparent. It's not, well, one of the things that people don't understand is that he wasn't, a lot of these marriages were after Joseph was dead. People don't like, now, how can you get married after you're dead? And you're like, they don't understand some of the things in the church about families being sealed and temple work being done. These are going to be foreign concepts to people. If you look in the Bible, in Corinthians where it says, else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead? If the dead rise not at all, why are they then baptized for the dead? That's a concept that people will try and explain away as something other than what it is. That's what the temples are there for. We are doing work for the dead on the other side, because they need work done here in this life. But it's hard for people to understand what's going on there. Joseph Smith didn't have any other children besides with Emma Smith. There's going to be lots of reports out there that people are like, oh no, he did or he didn't, so and so is claiming to be this child or whatever. Joseph didn't have any children. It's like George Washington. If you said George Washington had kids, and you're a descendant of George Washington, you'd be like wrong. Bloodline wise, no, he didn't have kids. Yeah, when he married Martha, she had children, and he helped raise those kids. But it's not, And then years later, there's a Mr. Ford that says, oh, he thinks that George Washington had kids and all this other stuff. And people claim nowadays all this other stuff. They'll do it to Thomas Jefferson and say the same thing about Thomas Jefferson, and they forget that, oh, well, the DNA that you have out there, what about his brother? Thomas Jefferson's brother is what I'm saying. People say, oh, Thomas Jefferson had all these other kids or whatever, from Sally Hemings or his slave. But you forget that it very well could be from, was it Randolph or whoever it was, that it was his brother or another relative with the DNA line. So everybody likes to take these high profile individuals and claim that they were this or that they were that many generations after the fact that they'd already lived, etc. Joseph Smith that was an account that yes, that they had those young girls that were married to him, but if you don't look at it in the right context, that many of the wives that he had were married to him after he's already dead, and that no, he's not trying to pull, a Warren Jeffs type situation. People look at the church, oh, he's doing all these bad things with young girls. This isn't the case. Joseph Smith didn't want to practice polygamy in the first place, and an angel threatened to divide him asunder if he didn't practice it. Brigham Young, when he was told he needed to practice polygamy too, he looked at the casket or at the funeral procession going by down the street, and he wished that he was in that casket. These guys weren't out to be practicing polygamy. Polygamy is one of those topics that, yes, it's one of the most difficult topics in the church. The Lord had people at certain particular times in the history of the world have practiced polygamy to raise up a righteous seed quite quickly, and then he usually disbands it, and then there's periods where he says absolutely not, only have one wife, and people get that confused. They're like, but if you just look at biblical history, if you're a Bible believing person, you have to look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and accept the fact that they were polygamists. So it shouldn't be like such a, oh my goodness, what happened here type situation. If you look at polygamy a little deeper, and nowadays it'd be like, oh, there's so many other issues going on in the country and the world about different styles and types of marriages and types of people, etc., that it'd be like, slowly over time, polygamy is like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Whereas in the 1800s, it was, it was like, this is not happening. That's what kept Utah from being a state for decades and decades and decades, because of polygamy. They weren't, Americanized enough and following the norms of society to warrant becoming a state until after a revelation came to Wilford Woodruff to stop it from the Lord. And other people say, oh, it was so much pressure from the government that they put on the church, they put on all this pressure to that's what caused polygamy to stop. God could have kept it going longer if he wanted to. If the people had to go to Mexico or to Canada or other or whatever God would have wanted, he could have kept the practice going, but it came down to revelation that that's when he wanted it to stop, and other people think, oh, it was just the pressure from the outside world that got polygamy to stop. But you do have to look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and if you're going to be a true prophet, God's going to have certain things that you have to do that the rest of the world are going to be like, this is crazy. So I can understand people's fears and issues about that, but you got to look at that a little bit deeper. And of course, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not practice polygamy, and we don't condone it today because the Lord has stopped it. Let's carry on.
Past prophets preached false doctrines. Joseph Smith has said that there are men living on the moon, describing them as over 6 feet tall and dressing like Quakers. Brigham Young even preached that there are people living on the sun. He also preached that Adam was God the Father and that black people are descendants of Cain and their skin color is a curse from God. Joseph Fielding Smith, another Mormon prophet, said in 1961 that no man will ever reach the moon. These and various other statements made by Mormon prophets have all been proven to be false over time. So how could one accept that these men are true prophets of God when just about everything they say is wrong?
Okay, well, little comments. If you're I study history and I'm a history teacher and geography teacher, but the way you look at things from the past, there's going to be, you can't say almost everything that they say is false and incorrect, because all the stuff that I've read, leads me to believe that almost absolutely everything that they say is nearly correct. Yes, once in a while you'll get these little things that pop up in history books and other things like that are, taken out of context. It's a matter of context, etc. I think one of the things in there was the blacks and being descendants of Ham. I mean, if you look at African history and the original rulers of Egypt, you're gonna see the darker colored skinned people. Nowadays, people are like, oh, because they were on the equator and they were living there, that the melanin in their skin, caused the darker skin to appear, etc. Well, the same people that were living on the equator in South America were different. And I'm not talking about evolutionary changes or anything like that, but it's like we've had these races on the planet for decades. Decades, for millennia. And if you go back and trace origins of humankind and where they originated from, you're gonna especially if you're a Bible believing person, you're gonna go back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth after the Noah's Ark. And if you have issues with Noah's Ark and the peopling of the earth after that, you're gonna see that these racial structures came from that, and they went towards the east, towards Southeast Asia. They went south down towards Africa and the Middle East, and they went west towards Greece and Europe. And so these races did start and mix out. And if you see the locality of these, you'll see that Ham and his people and Egyptus, etc., Egyptian, were down in the south. The Shemites went down there in that way, and then the Hebrew people grew up down there that way as well. But if you're going to get into the origins of the earth and things like that, that's not so far-fetched to see that. I mean, the problem with mankind now is that we've lost the understanding of the brotherhood of mankind, where that we are all brothers and sisters, everyone on the planet. And but everybody that gets in trouble are the ones that think, oh, we're more special than another group of people. And so that is the problem. these other comments about space and, man inhabiting the moon, you know, I'm not 100% sure about all those little details, but certainly I wouldn't. This isn't. I mean, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and hearing something from the myriad of journals and records that were recorded, I'm not real too concerned about that. I mean, nobody's been to the sun yet. I mean, you can't, it's hard to, I mean, we assume that this sun, not assume, I mean, we calculate that it's, nuclear fission, fusion, I mean, going on there and causing, these reactions and the heat and things like that. But there's things going on this planet and out in space that we assume that we know everything that's going on, but I mean, if you look at the spirit world, if somebody told you that this earth encapsulates a spirit world with other spirits of the departed dead, you would be like, no, that's more Halloweenish, or that's more freakish. I don't think that's where heaven is. Or you're like, oh, heaven's a long ways away. It's where God lives. There's things going on right here in our orb that you can't see, that we can't see, and things happening in the universe. I'm not trying to talk about metaphysical things right now, but it's like there's things that are going on that we don't really know about, that are way above us, and God knows. But so I'm not real too concerned about some of those comments about, if someone, I taught students that didn't think that man had ever landed on the moon because, they came from a culture that were teaching them that, some pretty cultic type situations, that they're like, no, man hasn't walked on the moon. And I'm like, yeah, man's been on the moon. So, that I'm not worried about that. Let's look at the next one.
Number 8. Joseph Smith used peepstones to translate the Book of Mormon. The church has been deceiving members about the manner Smith translated the Book of Mormon. In paintings commonly seen in Mormon scriptures and pamphlets, Smith is depicted translating from the gold plates as Oliver Cowdery transcribed his dictation. The truth is that the plates were not even used in the translation process. He merely used 2 peepstones that he placed in a hat. He would then bury his face in the hat and dictate whatever he purportedly saw there. The stones in a hat method is even acknowledged by current Mormon apostle Russell M. Nelson in an obscure 1992 talk for mission presidents that can actually still be found in the church's official website. It is also worth noting that these are the same stones he found while digging a well for Mason Chase, and the same stones he used for treasure hunting. So while he may have been a fraud, at least he believed in the power of recycling.
Well, this much is true, that Joseph Smith did use these stones. Back in the day, they called it scrying. If you had a special ability with certain things that God gave you to do, then lots of times people use that for the benefit of other people. These events did happen, and a lot of people were not just Joseph Smith. There were other, I mean, you've got people that use instruments to find water and all these other type of things. But to say it's a nefarious thing, the word peepstone usually comes about because of that's kind of more of a derogatory term for these people that had these abilities and gifts. Joseph Smith certainly was one of them, but people usually associate that with, oh, he was looking for buried treasures and all these other things. And then they associate that with, oh, that's why he found the gold plates, and that's why he was just a money digger and all these other things. But people don't understand that during that time frame in the early 1800s, there were actually people out there with these types of gifts. I mean, people have certain gifts today. I mean, if you look at other people that have certain talents and abilities out there, that these are, God gives people gifts to often to help other help other people. The scrying, or the use of these special stones was an important thing. And yes, he had been given some of these really important things from what they call the Urim and Thummim, from 2 stones set in a bow that he used for translating the Book of Mormon. And then yes, sometimes he didn't need that particularly, and he got to a point in his life where he was able to get revelation without the use of some of these other aids that it'd be like graduating from, because some stones would only allow you to do certain things and only go so far, and it couldn't, it's not like a genie in a bottle. It's like you can't make someone fall in love with you, but if God wants to reveal things that are hidden on the earth, some stones were able to do that and reveal things like that. But God, through the angel Moroni, told Joseph Smith where these plates were that become the Book of Mormon. There's more questions on the Book of Mormon later, so we'll discuss that in a little bit.
Number 7. Temple rituals were copied from the Freemasons. Joseph Smith became a Freemason in March of 1842. In May of 1842, he introduced what is now known as the Temple Endowment Session. The Temple Endowment Session is among the most secretive rituals in the Mormon Church. Unlike other rituals such as baptisms or the administration of the sacrament, bread and water, members are not allowed to discuss the endowment in public. During an actual session, members perform rituals involving secret handshakes and passwords, all necessary to be allowed entry into the celestial kingdom where God, the Father and Son live. What they don't know is that these rituals were heavily borrowed from the Freemasonry, almost word for word. The few members who know about the Masonry connection would defend it by saying that the Freemasons in turn copied their ritual from King Solomon's Temple. Yet even the church's most prominent apologetic site, Fair LDS, would refute that, admitting that what went on in Solomon's Temple had absolutely nothing in common with the Masonic rituals or the Mormons' endowment session. Number 6.
I'm not a Mason. I've read some works on Masonry, etc. I know a little bit about them. I know that it has morphed over time. Nowadays it's inclusive of anyone with a belief in God. Early country Masonry was more Christian. It was very heavily Christianized. The fact that some of the early founding fathers were members of Masonry. I mean, I know George Washington was, although he wasn't like a super deep practicing Mason, he did belong, but others will say no, he was definitely super practicing, but other accounts say no, it wasn't. I mean, he was involved, but not really. It wasn't a major part of his life per se. But for Joseph Smith, he I don't know exactly all the details of his association with the Masonry, but I do know from about 1835 on, and I apparently by 1842 when he's talking about this here, for temple rituals, etc., the Masonic stuff, from the things that I've read, you can probably draw some allusions and conclusions to certain things that are similar to the Masonic practices. But what I've seen in the books and read, and being a member that has gone to the temple, it's not a matter of secrecy, it's a matter of sacredness. From the things that I've seen in the books and having been there many times, and the other things that I've read about how it came about, it looks more to me like that it came about through revelation. Maybe because Joseph Smith did have some associations with Masonry, that some things looked like they might have come from there or been similar in style or presentation or whatever, but it's certainly not. It's not in any way, shape, or form coming from the Masons and their lifestyle and their practices. So it's revelation from God given to Joseph Smith the prophet. Temples have been around for generations, and people have lost that knowledge. And that's what Joseph Smith is doing in his life. He's restoring all of these things from the past that have been lost. It's a restitution of all things. It's the dispensation of the fullness of times. These things are coming back now, and Joseph Smith was the first prophet in this last dispensation to bring these things back, to unfold these things. And God, I mean, many people have said in our church, that Joseph Smith had one foot in heaven and one foot on earth, because he was so important with revealing all these things that God wanted to restore back to the earth to us. So it's like, in that temple work is a big part of what the church does. There's hundreds and hundreds of temples out there nowadays, or back in Joseph Smith's time frame there were only a couple. And the Nauvoo and Kirtland Temple, and then the saints moved out west because of persecution and started building more temples out in the west, and now they're all over the world. But to be a secretive thing, I like to say it's a sacred thing, and it's certainly not secret. Anytime people have an open house for a temple in your city or a neighborhood or wherever you live, the church is very open about letting people go through, and they're not trying to hide anything. It's just, you do have to be a member of the church and adhere to certain code of ethics and morals and things like that, because God's not making everybody be perfect to go through the temple. He wants you to be trying and working and doing your best and things like that. So that's how people get access to it. It's not secret in any form. It's just sacred for people to do important work there for the people that have gone on from this earth, and for ordinances for themselves as well in there. So that's the thing. It's not secret, it's sacred. So, and the church is very open and transparent about that. So you can look up this stuff and go to the temple open houses and talk to people, and it'll be given a lot of information. So I don't think they're trying to hide anything. Nothing secret there.
6. The Kinderhook plates was a hoax. The Kinderhook plates are 6 brass plates that allegedly contained ancient characters. These plates were found by locals in Kinderhook, Illinois, along with a skeleton. Smith, believing them to be genuine ancient artifacts, later translated a portion of the brass plate's writings, claiming that it tells the story of the skeleton back when he was less skeletal and far more alive. According to Smith, he was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh. In 1980, however, scientists examined the plates and determined that they were not ancient at all. They were eventually proven to be nothing more than a simple hoax. After this discovery, Mormon apologists tried to put a spin on it by saying that Smith never actually tried to translate it. Yet, in pages 372 to 379 of the Mormon's History of the Church book, Smith did confirm that he translated the plates, discussing the details of the translation in the aforementioned pages. Number 5.
Okay, so yeah, the Kinderhook plates. There's a place not too far from Quincy, Illinois, down in the southern part of Illinois. Where the Kinderhook plates were found. Yes, it's true. They were a forgery, and the people that did it at the time didn't reveal that until many, many years later, trying to get a false account or whatever. If you see little images on there, some of them, did look like authentic, Egyptian things. Joseph Smith was translating images from an alphabet that he'd already created, working on the Joseph Smith papyrus that were from Egypt. That, I think there might be another little segment on that as well, but most of it, it was a hoax. There's been multiple times in history where people tried to do forgeries and hoaxes, and the Piltdown Man and all these other things, trying to pull off these evolutionary hoaxes and things like that. Um, and this was one of those accounts. But if you're looking at just, I mean, Joseph Smith wasn't saying that his information was coming from God. He took a stab at it as a as a scholar. And if some of the characters looked more similar to some than the other, and have stories behind characters that he was saying that they were, of this fashion. I think that's where it's coming from, that, from that, the images and characters, but this certainly wasn't one that was, coming, well, I guess we don't really exactly know if he used any other instruments, but certainly God would have known that it was a forgery. Even though, mankind gets duped, as often, in our church, sometimes that happens, like with the Hoffman forgeries that were out there. He had a heyday with, trying to pull off little forgeries. I mean, even Oath of the Freeman, he forged that one and was trying to make money off of it, and almost sold it, nationally for $1 million. But, just our church wasn't the only one that were being duped. He was duping national people, and until they got down to the specifics of, the ink smudge smears and the flaking of the ink, etc., then these things are revealed as forgeries. But if it's not authentic, it's not authentic. But I'm not worried about that one.
There are multiple accounts of the first vision. There is no middle ground. Joseph Smith talked with the Father and the Son, or he didn't. If he didn't, then we are embraced in a great fraud. A terrible fraud. That's a quote from Gordon B. Hinckley. The first vision, as known today in Mormon records, is an account of the literal appearance of God as both the Father and the Son to Joseph Smith in the spring of 1820. Today it holds an important place in the Mormon Church's official history, yet this event wasn't actually taught in the church until 1842, 22 years after it was supposed to have happened. Records also show that there are 9 versions of the account. Among the inconsistencies seen when compared side by side include Smith's age at the time it happened, the place where he received the vision, the personage he saw, and the instructions he received. One would think that remembering the details of such a remarkable experience would not have been that hard. But the inconsistencies of the multiple first vision accounts, and the fact that it was not even mentioned in the church's early years, cast doubts upon the validity of Smith's claims.
So the first vision, yeah, he's right. There are multiple accounts of it. It happened in 1820. Joseph was in his 15th year, so it put him at 14 years of age. They use those terms, in my 15th year back then. So he's 14 and a half-ish years old in the spring of 1820. So and he's led to the grove of, the sacred grove that we call it now, near Palmyra, New York, that, he read in the Bible, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. That's in James chapter 1, verse 5. And he wanted to know which church to join. And so he's like, he wasn't sure. I mean, you've got the Great Awakening, and then you've got the Great Awakening #2, and he lived in the burned over district there in northern New York, and these people were very concerned about religious things. They'd come from a Puritan and Pilgrim heritage of these type of things, and we've had a big history of that in our country over religious issues. And so he wanted to know which church to join. He had a simple plea as a young boy to know which church to join. Many of his family members were partial, to one religion or another. Some were like to the Methodist Church, and others were going to other ones. And he was really confused about, they are, one's crying, come over here, and another one's crying, come over here. And as a young man, he was really confused, which one should I join? But he didn't take that up with his mother or his father. per se. And I mean, he took it up with his heavenly Father. You know, so he wanted to get right to the core of it. And so he went into the sacred grove with a simple, humble prayer, to know which church to join. And yes, he had a miraculous vision. And at 14 and a half years old, it's going to be hard to pen everything about that vision right at that time. And I mean, he's not a scholar. That's the whole thing. He's not a learned scholar. That's what makes this whole thing amazing, is that, you know, he had a third grade education. He's not a, you know, a PhD. And yet, you know, the same thing happened with Jesus. He's in the temple talking and conversing with the lawyers and the, you know, ministers and rabbis, and astounding them with his knowledge. And they're asking him questions, and he's 12 years old. This is Jesus. And so Joseph Smith, you know, lots of people, when they heard about it, eventually they're like, you know, the visions and angels have ceased, you know, stop this foolish nonsense. But Joseph, you know, set in his mind and heart, he knew that he'd seen a vision, and God knew it, and he couldn't deny it. And so, you know, the whole world would combine against him to deny it. And, you know, even his name, Joseph Smith's name, will be had for good and evil. It'll both be spoken of good, and it'll be spoken of evil of in this world. That was a prophecy given by God to Joseph. But these other accounts, you have to add them together to make a really good account and see the little different angles that it portrays. But once he sat down to tell the world, the 1838 edition, or not edition, but the 1838 one is like, this is what the world needs to know. That yes, it's happened many years later after it originally happened. I mean, because he's 14 and a half, he's not just going to sit down and pen a 100% complete pure thingy with one edition only. You know, it's not the Bible here. It's his account of meeting the God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ. Right there, you see two individuals, and this was somewhat different than, you know, the Nicene Creed and other things from generations of other people's interpretation of what the Godhead is. And Joseph sees it firsthand, that there's two separate beings, and we know that no man can see God unless he's enveloped with the Spirit of God. So there you've got three. Even Jesus and Heavenly Father, you know, pointing out that this is my beloved Son. Hear him. This is what happened here. And, you know, at Jesus's baptism, and, you know, the dove coming down, the Spirit coming down as a dove, and lighting upon them is the Spirit coming down on people. So, you know, even the Godhead had changed with Joseph's first vision. But to have other accounts, I'm not worried about the other accounts. And they're not drastically, I've read many of the different ones, and they're not drastically super different in meaning, etc. But the 1838 account, that one, you know, he sat down to say, this is for the questioning people out there, you know, that's probably the most important one, which is in the church books, in the doctrine, or down in the Pearl of Great Price and Doctrine and Covenants in the book. If you see it, that's the one that's there for people to see. And you can see the other ones too. They're not trying to hide anything. That you combine them together, and it makes, you can see that, you know, there were other little things that probably weren't added in on some of the accounts, but you got to combine them. So that's okay to have multiple copies of the same event.
Before, church leaders were deceived by Mark Hoffman. One of the most embarrassing episodes in recent church history is that involving convicted murderer and counterfeiter Mark Hofmann. Hofmann sold what he asserted to be official church documents that he found. Among them included what he claimed was the original anthem transcript, a piece of paper containing characters that Joseph Smith copied from the gold plates, an 1825 Joseph Smith holograph detailing Smith's exploits as a treasure hunter and practitioner of black magic, and the infamous salamander letter, supposedly a letter written by Martin Harris claiming that it was a white salamander and not an angel that appeared to Joseph Smith in 1823. Church leaders such as eventual prophet Gordon B. Hinckley and current apostle Dallin H. Oakes were tricked into believing those were genuine, shelling out thousands of dollars to purchase them and even defending the contents of the documents in pulpit talks. Of course, it would be proven later, when Hofmann was convicted of murder, that these documents were nothing more than forgeries created by Hofmann to make a fool out of the church leaders and earn a profit in the process. Number 3. The facts.
Okay, so, yeah, I kind of remember the Hoffman incidents as I was just about ready to go on a mission for my church to California. And my mother was collecting little clippings and things about it. It was one of those things that, I mean, I'm north of Salt Lake quite a ways. But it's like, this is one of those things that we kind of briefly discussed. He was kind of planning these kind of things when, to deceive people and, making some money. And then he got into some money problems. There's a big, I think it's on Netflix. I think it's called The Mormon Murders or something like that. But there's a 3-part series on that, and they've done a really good job of looking into that. But yeah, he got into money problems and thought, because he used to be a member of the church and had been on a mission, but it apparently, didn't stick very well or whatever. He started planning these things, for ill against the church, which is kind of sad. I mean, he had amazing talent with, I mean, if you could say amazing forger, but there again, it's like you can use your talents for good or you can use them for ill. But yeah, some of those things were hurtful. It's not the first time that a forgery has happened. You look at the Kinderhook plates, somebody tried that before. And here we are in the 1980s, spinning off things to try and defame the church, the salamander letter and all these other things, saying that he got information from a salamander, that came to him and talked to him. Well, we know that it, from Joseph Smith's accounts, it wasn't a salamander. It was, his first vision was of God the Father and his son Jesus Christ, and then multiple other visions later before he got the Book of Mormon to translate the Book of Mormon from the angel Moroni. And I think there's one more thing on the Book of Mormon coming up. So that's the keystone that, people try to, if you can prove the Book of Mormon false, and many people try and say, oh yeah, it's false. But the more I read it and the more I look at it, it proves itself true time and time again. Even if you're like, oh, I don't understand this part about it, you give yourself a little bit of time and something shows up that it's like, oh, this could be possible and this could have been accurate. And that's what usually happens to me when I'm reading the Book of Mormon. If I have a question, it's like, just give it a little bit of time and some prayer, and it remarkably shows itself to be a true book.
Surrounding the death of Joseph Smith. Mormon church members sing hymns portraying Joseph Smith as a martyr who died for his faith. It is never taught in classes that he was actually imprisoned for destroying a newspaper printing press as retaliation for negative press about him. While in prison, he removed his garments, the Mormon magic underwear, and instructed the others in the jail with him to do the same. Mormons are also not aware that he had a gun and killed 2 people shortly before he was shot to death. He also made the Masonic symbol for distress as a last-ditch effort to save his life. Certainly not the lamb to the slaughter that the Mormons like to describe his death as. Number 2.
So, boy, there was quite a bit in there. I would think maybe the Masonic call would be to look if anybody in the crowd was, a practicing member to help him out. It is true that he did discharge a little pepper box pistol that had 6 shots in it, and I think only maybe 3 fired off. It was possible from the accounts that I've seen that a couple of people got hit. I mean, that's self-defense. But people are like, oh, a prophet defending himself. He told Willard Richards in there to parry off their guns as best as he could. Yeah, he didn't want to just go down without a little bit of a fight. And people might think, oh, is that different than Jesus? He's up on the cross and he's forgive them for they know not what they do. That shows you Joseph Smith wasn't Jesus Christ, but he certainly was a prophet. And, there's been other prophets that have, rained fire from heaven down on people. So, I think Joseph was well within his rights to try and defend himself. And to being imprisoned, yes, Joseph was the mayor of Nauvoo and that area, and these printing presses were within his realm of, deciding to, take some action against them. They were, it's slander. We have a right in our country to have free speech, etc., etc. But when you slander and you defame people in print, I forget the word that's called when you're doing it in print, but yeah, you have limitations. It's, people say your freedom's end where my nose begins, or accept something like that. Yeah, he was within his right to take action against the printing press. And that he was incarcerated. Joseph was imprisoned about 48 times. People would look at a person and say, why was he in prison 48 times? He must be a bad guy. Joseph was in prison not because he was a bad guy 48 times.
The Book of Abraham has been proven to be false by Egyptologists. In 1835, Joseph Smith purchased a scroll containing Egyptian hieroglyphs from a traveling showman named Michael Chandler. He then proceeded to examine the scroll, claiming that it contained writings of Abraham, and he translated it into now what is known as the Book of Abraham. In 1966, several fragments of the original scroll that Smith used resurfaced. With the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, Egyptology had advanced profoundly by this time, and Egyptologists were able to validate whether Smith's translation of the scroll was accurate. Turns out the scroll was merely a common Egyptian funerary text that had absolutely nothing to do with Abraham. As with the Kinderhook plates, this put into question Smith's credibility as a divinely aided translator. Egyptologist Dr. James H. Breasted of the University of Chicago said, Joseph Smith's interpretation of them as part of a unique revelation through Abraham, therefore, very clearly demonstrates that he was totally unacquainted with the significance of these documents and absolutely ignorant of the simplest facts of Egyptian writing and civilization. Number 1.
So the Book of Abraham, people are taking this one out of context for the most part. What they don't realize is that many of the writings that were contained in there don't exist today. So they're basing that off of ones that they do have that were found in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1967 that were associated with the Pearl of Great Price. The other ones are purported to have been burned in the 1871 Chicago fire. They were in a museum there in Chicago, and that Chicago fire, I mean, it devastated large portions of that city back in 1871, and there's multiple accounts of that, and that's a historical fact. The many things burned down there. So even Nauvoo, it actually started up as a bigger city than Chicago at one point in time. And it was bigger than Chicago, but after, the church saints left west and came to Utah, Chicago definitely got bigger. And then they had that fire in 1871. And of course, Chicago's very large today. But this, the detailed word for word translations are what the Egyptologists say, oh, Joseph Smith didn't do he did translate the book of Abraham, but people are like, oh, is that part of this one that we have in existence? And they try and match that up and say, well, that's not what this is saying. And so it's true that the Egyptologists today are looking at it from their interpretation of what we've got on Egyptian now. I mean, in Joseph Smith's day, it was Champollion and Thomas Young and those guys. It was just beginning to be understood, ancient Egyptian at his time frame. It was remarkable. He even, with William W. Phelps and others, spent time to try and do that. He even spent time with Hebrew scholars to learn Hebrew and things like that. Joseph Smith, applied his own abilities to learn things, because not everything was just given to him on a silver platter. Many things, I mean, God gave him a vision because he had faith to ask at first, but God didn't just hand everything to Joseph Smith on a platter. He had to work hard for things. That's what God does. He doesn't let prophets off the hook, just like he doesn't let you and me off the hook. And they had to struggle through things, but he definitely brought forth an amazing book. It's The Pearl of Great Price is awesome. There's things that are in that have been like hidden from the world. These original texts did come from the catacombs in Egypt. They were copies of copies of copies. They weren't the originals that Abraham had, because the Egyptians copied often from lore and tales and other things. So these were copies of copies of copies of copies that were on these papyrus fragments. But at that time frame, everything Egyptian was heading out. The Rosetta Stone was heading. The French had it first, and then the Napoleon's army, and then the British took over the French, and the British took the stone, the Rosetta Stone, and took it to where it sits now in the British Museum. And Champollion came up with things that the church at the time thought, oh, this is different, or this is different. And so the Egyptian was just barely coming out, in Champollion's time, the late 1828, when Champollion just barely started getting started on these things, and the 1830s, and then Champollion died at a young age and wasn't, maybe most likely after his trip down there, he maybe drank some bad water or something down there and got really sick, stomach cramps, and died. But years and years later, and the Egyptologists of today are amazing. Sir Wallace Budge and others, and modern day Egyptologists. But it's where they get off on translating the records that the documents that they have in existence, and comparing that to what Joseph Smith had. They don't know which ones were burned and which ones were where, et cetera, et cetera. And many of the things that Joseph Smith did translate were like, this isn't revealed yet. He'll say that in there. If you read the text, he's like, this hasn't been revealed yet, but if you can find out, so be it. So he wasn't trying to hide anything. The Book of Abraham is an amazing book. It proves to me, it shows to me that Joseph Smith was a prophet. It's not bunkum. It's amazing. But just saying, oh, it's not exactly what the documents are saying, that the scholars are saying, they're not realizing that some of the stuff that Joseph Smith had we don't have.
Evidence against the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is often called the keystone of the Mormon religion. The validity of the church's claim as the one true church, and Joseph Smith as the chosen prophet of God, hinges upon whether the book is really an ancient record translated by the power of God or not. The problem is that the book has failed under scrutiny on many, many levels. It has been well documented that the Book of Mormon contains various anachronisms. Heavy plagiarism from the King James Bible is also apparent, including translation errors. Up to this day, the geographical location of the events of the book has not been.
Well, let's take plagiarism right now. The ancient world did not worry about plagiarism like we have today. they would quote, I mean, if you had Homer or the Iliad, the Odyssey, or any other documents out there from the ancient world, even prophets were quoting other prophets from scriptures. You can find that in Peter. Peter will quote, ancient prophets from the Old Testament or whatever. It's like the ancient world did not worry about plagiarism like we do today. Sometimes we look at things with, our time frame and our information that we have today. That's the problem. You can't put yourself, I forgot the word of what that is too, where you place yourself in the modern concept of what they did in the past. The ancient world did not worry about plagiarism. Let's see what the next segment is here.
Located, and no supporting archaeological evidence has ever been discovered. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the book is the fact that DNA testing disproved its claim that a Jewish family who left Jerusalem in 600 BC to settle in the New World are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. With that, there simply is only one logical conclusion.
They are among the ancestors of the American Indians. I know what they're saying about primary. The church had to adjust that word, and that's a modern interpretation of, but the Book of Mormon, I mean, yeah, you're not going to pinpoint Zarahemla, you're not going to pinpoint all these ancient cities like you do the Bible. We've only had 500 years plus since Christopher Columbus came over to the New World, and there's things still being undug. I mean, down in South America and Middle America and in North America, it happened in the Western Hemisphere. The people didn't even know. I mean, if you get, the people didn't even know. I mean, Columbus was sailing west because he was going to the East Orient. He was going to Cipango or Japan. He was going to go to Indonesia or India, or he was going to the East by sailing west. They had no idea that the North and South American continent were in the way. And the old world did have no idea that the New World existed.
Conclusion that could be made about the Book of Mormon, that it is 600 BC to settle in the New World are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. With that, there simply is only one logical conclusion that could be made about the Book of Mormon, that it is, in fact, a 19th century fiction manufactured by Joseph Smith. Therefore, this makes all the other claims, along with this entire religion, just a fabrication. So I really hope you found that video interesting.
Well, I mean, I know Simon Whistler, he puts out really good videos and things like that, but you really can't just off of a couple of comments on the Book of Mormon like that discredit it. It's gone worldwide. If you make a serious study of the Book of Mormon, like I said earlier in the clips, every time I've put a claim to the test of what about this? How can it answer this? Can you prove it false? Can you, work on that? And other people are like, well, the church only just makes its members pray about it, and that's the only evidence they have is through prayer. Well, it is the strongest evidence, getting your answer from God. There is no stronger answer than an answer from God. But to just discredit it with a few comments on a little clip like this, it's not enough. It's really not enough. If you haven't read it, you haven't, digested it a little bit to have some background on the Book of Mormon, it's a companion scripture to the Bible. People say, oh, there shouldn't be any more Bible. Oh, we've already got our Bible, and you can't have any more. Don't limit God to what he can give you. There's tons and tons of records in the Bible that are non-existent. Other books, the Book of Jasher, Book of Enoch, other titles, you know, even the Apocrypha, some groups don't accept it and some do, and others are like, there's a lot of good in the Apocrypha. So there's tons of other records out there that people that were once involved with the Bible, and people are like, they're not in there right now, but it's like, so don't discredit, you know, other writings out there that can't be involved, because God can certainly, you know, give us more. Don't limit yourself. So anyway, enjoyed listening to Simon's works on it, but you know, again, you have to look at things a little bit deeper and analyzing it that way. Thanks.